Hello and welcome back to the Daily Dose here at Central. My name is Levi Waddell. I'm the youth pastor here, and today we are going to be reading from Numbers chapter 33, and I'm going to go ahead and warn you, there's a lot of locations and I'm probably going to mispronounce them, but it's going to be a fun ride. So come with me as we read Numbers 33. These were the stages by which the Israelites marched when they left the land of Egypt, according to their military units under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded the points of departure from each stage of the march at the Lord's command. These are the stages of their march according to their points of departure. They marched from Ramses on the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the Israelites went out defiantly in the sight of the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were burying their oldest males, whom the Lord had killed. The Lord also executed judgments against their gods. The Israelites marched from Ramses and they camped at Succoth. They marched from Succoth and camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. They marched from Etham and turned back to Pi-hahiroth, which faces Baal-zephon, and they camped before Migdol. They marched from Pi-hahiroth and they crossed through the sea toward the desert. They traveled 3 days in the Etham desert, and they camped at Marah. They marched from Marah and arrived at Elim. At Elim there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. They marched from Elim and camped by the Reed Sea. They marched from the Reed Sea and camped in the Sin desert. They marched from the Sin desert and camped at Dopketh. They marched from Dopketh and camped at Ulish. They marched from Ulish and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. They marched from Rephidim and camped in the Sinai desert. They marched from the Sinai desert and camped at Kibroth Hittavah. They marched from Kibroth Hittavah and camped at Hazoreth. They marched from Hazoreth and camped at Rithmah. They marched from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon Perez. They marched from Rimmon Perez and camped at Libnah. They marched from Libnah and camped at Rissa. They marched from Rissa and camped at Keheleth. They marched from Keheleth and camped at Mount Shepher. They marched from Mount Shepher and camped at Harda. They marched from Harda and camped at Mekethloth. They marched from Mekethloth and camped at Tathith. They marched from Tathith and camped at Terah. They marched from Terah and camped at Mithkath. They marched from Mithkat and camped at Hashmanin. They marched from Hashmanin and camped at Masoreth. They marched from Masoreth and camped at Ben Yakin. They marched from Ben Yakin and camped at Hor Hagadad. They marched from Hor Hagadad and camped at Japheth. They marched from Japheth and camped at Abronha. They marched from Abronha and camped at Ezion Geber. They marched from Ezion Geber and camped in the Zin desert, that is the Kadesh. They marched from Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom. Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the Lord's command, and he died there in the 14th year, on the first day of the 5th month after the Israelites left the land of Egypt. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. The Canaanite king of Arad, who ruled in the arid southern plain in the land of Canaan, heard the Israelites coming. They marched from Mount Hor and camped at Zalmanah. They marched from Zalmanah and camped at Punon. They marched from Punon and camped at Obeth. They marched from Obeth and camped at Abiram in the territory of Moab. They marched from Eam and camped at Dibon-Gad. They marched from Dibon-Gad and camped at Almon-Diblathaim. They marched from Almon-Diblathaim and camped in the Abarim mountains in the front of Nebo. They marched from the Abarim mountains and camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. They camped by the Jordan from Beth Shosman to Abel Shittim in the plains of Moab. The Lord spoke to Moses on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you will drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. You will destroy all their carved figures. You will destroy all their cast images, and you will eliminate all their shrines. You will take possession of the land and live in it, because I've given the land to you to possess. You will divide up the land by lot according to your clans. To the large you will make its inheritance large. To the small you will make its inheritance small. To whomever the lot falls, that place will be his. You will inherit land according to your ancestral tribes. But if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, then those you allow to remain will prick your eyes, and the thorns will be in your side. They will harass you in the land in which you are living. Then what I intended to do to them, I'll do to you. Here ends our crazy reading of Numbers chapter 33. Please feel free to go through it and tell me which words I pronounced. It might be shorter if you tell me which words I pronounced correctly. Have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.